everybody here? Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Outstanding. Tommy will be in later. A couple lectures today. Incident management, chapter 40. Might try to do chapter 37. We're going to get through this one pretty quick. It's my understanding most of you have at least seen or heard or completed the FEMA training that goes along with this. So should be pretty straightforward. Incident management, we have this because sometimes we will be going to MCIs. MCIs, the real definition is that any number of patients who can or that would tax the local system. I know this thing says 3 or more patients, lack of resources, all that stuff. So incident command helps us do the greatest good for the greatest number. On many MCIs, we are not going to be able to care for absolutely every. Huh? Is there a question in there? Okay. So greatest good for the greatest number of patients. And that's about all they got for this slide here. NIMS, National Incident Management System. This was developed to promote efficient coordination of emergency incidents at regional, state, and national levels. What exactly is it? Came out in 2004. It's simply a framework for us to follow, and there it goes. It helps federal, state, and local governments work together. At Cataldo, we are a private sector, so we will be working alongside with fire departments, police departments. Those are local, sometimes state police gets involved. It's rare that the feds have to come in and take over incidents that we go to. All right. So NIMS has to be flexible and readily adaptable. Does anybody think when we sit through and we plan all of these events that we could go to, anybody think that this stuff happens smoothly or roughly?
Pretty rough.
Yeah, if you said rough, that's how these things go. So all we're trying to do here is make sure everybody's on the same page with terms that we're using, make sure that we're all trained the same way, make sure everybody's got the same certification, and we go from there. Preparedness, that's the big key. Communication, information management, that's the next biggest thing that needs to happen. Resource management, command and ongoing management, a little bit lower down on the food chain there. ICS, Incident Command System. This is pretty much what we follow, and we'll go over this a little bit later, but this is what we follow when we're on scene, from the incident commander to all the deputy commanders who are looking at the different branches that we'll get into on scene, and we go from there. Branches, divisions, and groups. Let me see, what else do they want on this one? It's good to have common terminology and use very clear text to help responders from multiple agencies work together. What we have at Cataldo is not the same what Fallon uses. It's not the same what the fire departments use, but there are a bunch of things that are in common that we all know. A little summary there of what we've just said. Nothing really on this slide. Here are some of the different branches an organizational structure. We are pretty much always in the operations branch because we're going to be in the field doing things. More management people are going to be in the planning branch. They're the ones who are writing the policies that we have to follow and coming up with the things we should be doing. Finance, that's pretty self-explanatory. Logistics, we'll get to that later on. I don't remember off the top of my head what logistics actually does. Those are some more people. So who actually is in charge of scenes? The incident commander. That's the person who's overseeing everything and is delegating all the tasks. Most of the time, that's going to be whoever is the officer on the engine or whoever is the deputy chief who gets sent, or maybe even the fire chief themselves, police chief, whoever gets sent. Communicate with the incident commander or whoever it is they've designated to communicate with them. We follow their orders. The incident commander is not usually directly near the scene, but somewhere near it, far enough away where the IC can see what's going on, but close enough where the IC can still delegate tasks. And it's typically one person who's in charge of this, even when we have multiple agencies there. On Cataldo's side, our IC typically becomes the field supervisor who gets sent to calls. At any time, though, an IC can transfer command to anybody else. Just because you've taken incident command does not mean that you will hold incident command for the entire incident. And there could be a situation where you could be the one in charge. At the end of our incidents, the IC has to terminate command. Oftentimes, you'll hear the fire departments leave scenes and they'll say to fire alarm, command terminated. That's simply what they're doing. Here we go. Finance, they're responsible for figuring out how all this stuff gets paid for and how we get paid. Logistics, they're the ones who figure out food, water, fuel, lighting, equipment, communication stuff. Not really something that we're going to do. We're at the operations level because we're the ones who are actually going in and caring for patients. All these sections here, we've talked about operations, planning. They all have different chiefs who are involved. On major incidents, you report directly to the chief of that division who reports to the IC. Luckily, we don't have very major incidents. Some command staff, we have safety officer who makes sure that it's safe for everybody to still be there. And the safety officer is the one who will stop operations if something goes bad. Public information officer, that is the person who talks to the media. When media come up to you to ask you questions, direct them to the public information officer. The liaison officer is the one who's making sure that all the agencies are working together and playing well together. Questions on ICS so far? All right. Communications. If you think that communications are good, think again, because it's always the weakest part of these incidents that we go to, and communication in general is pretty weak for what it's worth. This is because everybody has different terminology, everybody has different plans, different expectations. We all use different radios. The golden standard is that when we all show up, we all get the same radios to communicate with each other. That very rarely happens. Communication needs to be present though, because we need to have accountability and it needs to be instantaneous. So when you show up on the scene, first thing you do is check in with the incident commander. Make sure that IC knows that you're there. Whoever your supervisor is, you then report to them, get a briefing as to what's going on, and go from there. You'll be assigned to do whatever it is you're going to be doing at the scene. Always keep records of everything that we're doing. If it didn't get written down, it flat out didn't happen. Reimbursement, that's not our job. Who holds us accountable for what's going on? Other than yourself, it is your supervisor. Make sure that the task you've been given can be completed. Make sure that you have the necessary tools to complete your task as well. So at some point, the incident is going to be considered stable. That's when the IC will determine when we need more resources or when we don't need more resources and begin to break things down. We're there until the IC says we are there, no matter what is happening. What is our job as EMS? First thing is we got to be prepared. So we think about things that we're going to respond to. We train for it. That's what you all have been doing for the past couple of weeks. We've been throwing scenarios at you, medical scenarios, trauma scenarios. Pretty sure at some point we're going to throw a little mini MCI at you and let you guys figure out what needs to happen. Let you guys sort of run a little MCI. Maybe we'll do that at 1 o'clock today. I don't know. I got to go find the teddy bears and throw them around the room and let you guys figure out how to treat them. Quick question. Do we think that we're going most likely for a man-made issue or a natural issue on MCI?
Both?
Both is
Can
a
they
good,
be both?
could be both. Definitely could be both. That's sort of a hypothetical question. I don't actually know if there's a difference in amounts there, but both. Cataldo, we do have written disaster plans. They are somewhere. Contact supervisors if you really want to know what the disaster plans are. It does say on the slides here, we're supposed to have copies in each EMS vehicle. Good luck with that. We already know this scene size up. Is it safe? What do we have here? What do we need? What do we need to do? We got enough resources. Do we need to call more friends to the scene? We know this. We've drilled this into you since day one. Establishing command. Well, you're in command when you're the first truck on scene. You're in command until somebody more senior shows up. But like I said, you don't have to relinquish command. If you want to control the whole scene, be my guest. You can be the IC for the entire duration. More likely than not, though, on incidents like this, you're going to want to give command to somebody who's more senior and more trained. Face-to-face communications, best way to do this. Radios, like most technology, has a fail point. 10 codes or signals, we don't really use that kind of stuff anymore. That's the classic 10-4, means you acknowledge the radio or you acknowledge the transmission. Just say received or something like that. Equipment must be reliable, durable, and field tested. Let's take another poll here. How many people think that our radios are actually up to par at any agency?
I should hope so, but probably not.
You should hope so. That's the correct answer. No. Radios are old, they get abused. Every agency, it's the same thing. Backups in place. We have plan A to go to some 30-car pileup on 93 North. Who thinks plan A is actually going to be successful? Yeah, it's probably not. So we got to have a plan B and a plan C. Questions on that? Go. Medical branch, that's us. So what is our job as EMS? Obviously, transport people who are injured. But we also got to do this thing called triaging. And we got a stage. What does triage mean? Take a look at that. Triage and tag all patients. I'm not sure if this is going to be the lecture or if it's next lecture where we'll show you what triage tag looks like. If not, when you guys get in, I'll throw the teddy bears around the room and I'll show you guys how to tag people. That's the first thing we got to do when we get on scene. You got to figure out who needs help now, who needs help 10 minutes from now, and who can wait 10 hours for help. That's the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Somebody who can wait 10 hours for treatment, not very high priority. Somebody who's going to die in the next 5 minutes needs treatment pretty fast. That's our first job. Our second job is to start to treat on scene. There are 3 different areas we will bring people to. They're the green, the yellow, and the red area. Those are the treatment areas. They are far away from the actual incident. Finally, we got to transport. I go to the loading zone. Depending on where you are in this whole incident, you might not be transporting, you might just be treating, you might just be in the field triaging. The transportation area is going to be even further away from the incident at the loading zone, and that's where you're going to load the patient and tell the ambulance, this is the hospital you're going to. We've already figured it out. That's when CMED gets involved. You show up on scene, you tell CMED there's an MCI, we could have 30 patients. It's their job to call the hospitals and see who has availability. You then tell CMED, or in the transportation area, calls CMED and says, I've got one red tagged patient, where's it going? CMED tells you you're going to the BI. There you go. Questions on that? Triage supervisor, this is the
I'm
person.
sorry, did you say semen?
CMED, yes.
Like SEAM?
CMED.
Oh, okay.
It stands
All
for
right.
It stands for Central Medical Emergency Dispatch.
C with a cat. Okay, got it. That's why I was like, huh? Is he saying semen?
No,
All right,
C.
my it's early.
It's very early. All right. Triage supervisor. This is the person who needs to count and prioritize the patients. We assess a certain way, and again, I don't know if it's this lecture, if it's going to be another lecture, or maybe even when you just get in. There is a way that we triage patients. I'm not going to get into it right now because it might show up later, it might not. If not, we'll do it today. And this is how we determine the priority of the patient. Important, we don't start treating in the field. We treat at the treatment area, not the field. Everybody gets triaged first before we start putting treatments on people. Treatment supervisor oversees everything that is treating. So those 3 tents I talked about, the green, the yellow, and the red tent, supervisors overseeing that, making sure that people are getting appropriately treated and making sure people are getting to the correct transport ambulance. Finally, we have the transportation supervisor who is figuring out where these patients are going and is documenting and tracking the number of vehicles and patients transported. Oftentimes on true MCIs, we're going to do 2-for-1s, 3-for-1s, 4-for-1s. What that means is you're going to have more than one patient in the ambulance, especially if you've got a whole bunch of people who are green tagged. The most I've ever done has been 5 at one time. And that was a 40 or something car pileup on 128. Wasn't fun.
You had 4 people in one ambulance?
5.
Where did you fit them?
2 on the bench, 1 on the airway seat, 1 on the stretcher, and luckily my truck had a CPR seat, which is a seat that's on the other side of the stretcher. Not every truck has it. There you go. All right, staging supervisor. This only happens when we got a lot of agencies there. Very basically, we don't go to the scene until we're told to go to the scene, and we only go where we're told to go. If you're told to go pull up to the red tent because you're taking a red patient, it's kind of embarrassing if you show up at the green tent and start taking 5 people at once. You didn't do what you were told. The staging area is always away from the scene, very far away from the scene. This is some of my best pieces of advice here. All right, physicians on scene. Sometimes they're a blessing, sometimes they are a curse. Your physicians on scene can absolutely give you medical orders. They're a doctor, what they say goes, as long as they are willing to put their medical license onto a patient's record. Do what they say. ER physicians are obviously the best people to have on scene because they know what's up. They can also, any physician can provide care in the treatment sector as they see fit. It's not very common that we have physicians on true MCIs. It's more common you'll get a physician when you respond to, I don't know, the restaurant for the choking party, and then some dermatologist decides to stand up and try to render care, and they don't know what's going on, and that turns into a massive mess. Hopefully it's an ER physician that we're dealing with, though. When in doubt, you can take orders from a physician on scene. You don't need to call your own medical control. Questions on that?
What if they direct you to do something that's out of your scope of practice, like give a medication or do like a procedure that you don't normally are able to do or know how to do?
That's a good question, and that's fine as long as they want to come with you and put their medical license on that patient's record. Any other questions? At the end of a scene, we got to go through rehab. This is our debrief. This is where we go to take our rest. We are all humans, just like the patients we're dealing with. We need fluid and food just as much as our patients do. We probably need a little bit more considering we're running around doing all this stuff. And you might need 5 minutes just to take a breath. This is where there's a rehab area, and this is where we go. Sometimes you will see people who are in signs of stress. Just go rehab. Don't try to be the hero and pass out too because you couldn't take a 5-second break. You don't want to become a patient yourself. Extrication, we're not really doing that. We're not going to teach you guys how to cut people out of cars. We're not going to teach you guys how to go into burning buildings, go into hazmat situation and find patients. There are some EMS companies that do that. Mostly around here, that's going to be the fire department's job to get the patients and bring it to us and use the equipment that is needed. And now the downer part. There's the morgue supervisor. There is one more color tag that I didn't talk about. It's the black tag. And you can take a guess as to what the black tag means. This is what the morgue supervisor does. They keep track of anybody we've black tagged. bodies, body parts. And when we have situations like this, morgue area is out of view of anybody who's still alive and any responders. Nobody wants to see that. Questions about that? MCIs, 3 or more patients. Realistically, it's any amount of patients that's going to tax the local system. Any incident can become an MCI. We go for a simple 2-car MVA and find out each car was an SUV with 5 people in it. Oh, that's 10 patients. That's an MCI. And it was a simple 2-car accident. Yeah, everybody has different protocols for when we declare an MCI and when we put ICS in scene. Some of it is, it's your decision. You show up to that 2-car MVA by yourself and you got 10 patients. It might be worth it to let dispatch know you got 10 patients and we might need an MCI declared here. Another thing you got to figure out is how seriously ill or injured patients are. How many of them can you take at once? How long is it going to take other people to show up to help you? Can you treat everybody at the same time or not? These are all things to consider. Never leave the scene with patients who are unattended unless you're told to leave the scene. You don't want to be charged with abandonment. Questions on that? Pretty straightforward. All right. So there's how we declare an MCI. We got multiple patients. We don't have enough resources. Simple. It's an MCI. Let dispatch know we need more people here and start triaging. You're there, you're IC, start triaging people until somebody else shows up. Questions, comments, concerns?
When you're triaging someone, say they have a like a life-threatening injury, like a hole to the chest that's gonna collapse their lung, do we have to treat that, or do we just say, oh, they've got this?
On initial triage, I'm trying to remember, there is a chart. I'll look for the chart and see if I can print it out, but I'm not so sure that gets treated during triage or if that gets treated at the red tag site. That would be a red tagged patient. I'm not sure if it's treated at triage or at the treatment center. I'd have to look that up. All right, let's talk about triage. Triage means sort patients based on their severity of injuries. Here's another note. Every patient we touch gets triaged. Every patient we bring to the ER gets triaged, regardless of anything that is going on. Our first round of triage, obviously in the field. Second amount of triage is done when you go to the treatment area. You absolutely can make somebody more critical. You could green tag somebody and figure out that they're really supposed to be a yellow tag. That's perfectly fine. It's very rare that we would take a yellow tagged patient and make them better to a green tag, or a red tag and make them yellow tag. You can always make them worse, no questions asked there. It's difficult to make them better simply by triaging. Every truck that Cataldo has, we have a bag. It's a small red container. I'll definitely show you guys when it gets here. It's sealed. It contains 50 cards, I think, and some string on it that you tie to people. You determine the color of the card, put that card in a little plastic envelope, tie it to the patient, and move on. As long as you're triaging, you're not taking a person out. That's somebody else's job. Questions on that? No, all right, so I've been talking about colors here right now. Here are the common colors: red, yellow, green, black. They have in recent years initiated the blue tag, which is between red and black. It's somebody who, in all honesty, should have been black tagged when the first time you met the patient, but there is still a chance, so you give them a blue tag. It's not very common in practice just yet, so don't worry too much about the blue tag. Worry about these colors right now. And that's what they mean. Red is immediate, yellow is delayed, green is basically minor. Sometimes it's called the walking wounded, and black, they're either dead or they will likely die. Best
So
way
if
to,
someone just has like really minor abrasions, do they even need a green tag?
yes.
Okay.
Best way to determine green tag: when you get on scene, simply scream, "If you can hear my voice, come to me." Anybody who walks to you, green tagged. They can walk, they can follow instructions. That means the airway is clear and they are breathing. They're green. Anybody else, you got to go figure out what they are. Good news is most MCIs, I don't know what the actual number is. I would say a good portion of patients are actually green tagged. Here we go. Here's what they look like. So red tagged, got some airway problems. We got some bleeding problems, breathing problems. We're in shock. They're burnt, open chest, open abdominal injuries, any really open severe injuries. Red tagged, they got to get treated first and moved as soon as possible. Yellow tagged, no airway compromise, and they may or may not be able to follow instructions. Red tagged, never follow instructions. They're usually altered. Yellow, may or may not. They can wait though. Green tagged, very minimal injuries, minimal bleeding, pretty much nothing. They can follow your orders, they can move themselves. They get the green tag. Black, obvious death. You walk up and see some sort of non-survivable injury, brain matter all over the place. Not good. Don't do it. That's black tagged. Respiratory arrest, even if you have sufficient resources, we don't do that in MCIs. And cardiac arrest in MCIs, we don't treat it. We can't. That would not be doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Questions on that? Tags. We tag because it's easy to keep track of them. There are numbers on tags that we use to identify patients. Ours are weatherproof because they are in a plastic envelope. Very easy to read. It's simply a colored index card kind of thing. And of course it is color coded. Oh, what did I do? There we go. Start triage. Here is what we are pretty much going to be learning for adults. Simple triage and rapid treatment. There I go. First step, call out to patients, direct them to an identifiable landmark. Those are the walking wounded. Second step, go to the people who didn't find you and start to assess their respiratory rate, their mental status, and whether they're in shock or not. And those people you got to start tagging in the field. Here's Jumpstart. This is for pediatrics. Obviously, a lot of kids can't really follow orders. We say, come to us, they might not, especially infants or babies. There are some differences with kid and adult triage. We do address respiratory issues with kids more than we address with adults, but everything else is pretty much the same. Look at the respiratory rate, the airway, neurological status, if they're in shock or not. I think with kids, the objective is we do give 5 breaths if they appear to be in respiratory arrest. And if they start to breathe after 5 breaths, we can tag them red and move on. Otherwise, they become black tagged. Other than that, there isn't really a big difference between start and jump start. Questions on that? Special considerations. Is everybody going to be calm, cool, and collected on these kind of scenes? No,
No.
not at all. So patients are going to be hysterical. They're going to be disruptive. Sometimes you might have to make them immediate priorities and get them away, even if they're not seriously injured. You know, there's no need to have people running around in hysterics and interfering with our process. Get them away. Responders, we become sick or injured. Can we actually treat anybody at that point? This goes back a couple weeks ago to that.
No.
Here it is, that whole scene safety BSI thing. If you're injured, you can't provide care to anybody. A little different though. We're on an MCI, you're the responder, you got injured, you're now priority. We had to get you treated so you can come back and actually help us out, hopefully. Hazmat incidences, these are an absolute nightmare because patients need to be deconned before they even show up to the treatment area. Those are the chemical showers that they set up. They wash people off and then bring them to us. And those are the hazmat teams. We don't do that at Cataldo. That's usually the fire departments around here. Certainly, if you want to get involved in hazmat, be my guest. There is special training you can go through to figure out that. It'll be your job to decontaminate the hazmat patients if you take the hazmat route. Otherwise, we don't really do decons. Most of the hospitals in Boston do have decontamination showers. If you let the hospital know that the patient will need to be deconned, they will direct you to the shower on arrival. And it's usually in the ambulance bay. Questions? No. All right, here's where we start to get a little funky with how we actually move patients. Red and yellow patients need to be transported in an ambulance. Walking wounded, the green tags, it is not uncommon to see the MBTA show up to these scenes and to see us packing a whole bunch of people into an MBTA bus, and they take the green tagged people to the hospital. Remember, they're green tagged. Don't really need a whole lot of care. They just need to go to a hospital. And yes, for major MCIs, the MBTA does get involved and they will send buses if they're asked to send buses. They're asked to send, you know, their version of chair cars. They will absolutely do all that. Red tags go at the first. It's not uncommon to take 2 critical patients in one ambulance. Remember, I told you every ambulance has a stretcher and it has a bench. Technically, you can put 2 people lying down in full C-spine protections on 2 ambulances. Don't do it very common, but we're at an MCI, we play by different rules. Questions on that? So our delayed patients, here's where we start getting involved with putting 2, 3, maybe even 4 at a time in an ambulance if you have it. And the final people to go, those are the green tagged. At this point in time, anybody who were black tagged, or I should say blue tagged, who are still actually alive, we treat them. They're the final ones to receive treatment. And the dead victims are obviously handled by the medical examiner's office.
So, well, a question. MCIs, like you just said, those would be considered like pileups on highways, multiple car accidents, like multiple buildings on fire, not just some explosion or some man-made stuff or like a hurricane or something.
All of the above would be MCIs.
All of the above.
All of the above.
Oh wow.
Mhm.
Wow. I need to reread that tag, toe tag, red, green, blue, yellow
Mhm.
stuff. I didn't hear it too good.
We'll do it. We'll do it at 1 o'clock when you guys show up. Yeah.
Okay.
Think back to the marathon bombings. Those were explosions. That was an MCI.
Oh
100,
yes.
186 patients, I think, in total. Something like that. You think all the Boston hospitals were taxed at that time? They were.
Yes.
They were. All right, so that's triage. Disaster management, widespread event that disrupts functions and resources to the community and threatens lives. Many disasters don't actually involve personal injuries. How often do we hear on the news there's like a mudslide going on up in California or something, or some flooding? Those would be sort of disasters there. But then again, there are many that do result in injuries. Disasters, let's put some definitions here. MCIs usually take a couple hours, maybe at most a day, to figure out and respond and clean up. Disasters, on the other hand, take weeks, days, sometimes months. The example that comes to my mind would be years ago, Hurricane Katrina. That took them months, that took them years to clean up. That was a disaster. Unlike MCIs, which we can call an MCI ourselves, only elected officials can declare something a disaster. COVID, at the beginning of COVID, it was declared a disaster in this state by Governor Baker. That wasn't an EMS decision, that was Governor Baker's decision to call it a disaster. So those are the big differences there. Your role on disasters is to respond when requested and report to the IC, and pretty much do everything we've already talked about: triage, care, and transport patients. Just understand that disasters last a lot longer than MCIs. Otherwise, there's no real difference. Here's everybody's favorite hazmat. All right, we show up at a hazmat. Here's our first step. Take a step back, assess the situation. Hazardous materials have a big chance of not only causing issues to patients, but causing issues to us. We don't want to rush into these scenes because A, it's a hazardous material. There's a good likely chance that you will be unable to assist patients when you become sick from the hazardous material yourself. And when you become sick, you just put more taxing on the system. Take a step back, figure it out first before you rush in to hazardous situations. So there are books on our trucks that we carry. They are orange books. They are a guide frame. They provide the framework to how we respond to hazardous materials. And it is based on, does everybody know what a placard card is on a truck?
A placard, like a handicap placard?
Close. On some trucks, you see sort of a diamond-shaped box that has colors and pictures and numbers on it. And I'll show you guys when you get in. We call it a placard card, and those numbers, colors, and pictures basically tell us what the truck has, why it's hazardous, and how we respond to it. We do have orange books on all of our trucks. You look at the placard card, you match up the colors, the pictures, and the numbers to what the book says, and you've pretty much figured out what to do from there. We are required at the EMS level to be at minimum trained to the same level that any first responder gets, and we need to understand not to just rush into these situations and identify what the material is first and then figure out how to go there second. That's where that orange book comes into play. I don't know if we have any here in clinical ed. I'll look for one though. There we go. We have to recognize hazardous substances and identify it if possible. Our role is the same as first responders, and that we don't rush into it unless we're trained, and we need to figure out if we need more people there. So we're going to a hazmat material situation, we need a hazmat team. And we need to let dispatch know that this is a hazardous situation and we're going to be here for a while. Hazardous materials. They are major risks and you need special training on how to handle this stuff, store this stuff, build it, process it, package it, transport it, use it, and get rid of it. Questions on that so far? Good. Hazardous materials. A lot of 18-wheelers carry stuff like this. Think about tanker trucks. If this stuff gets crashed and decides to spill, chemical plants that catch on fire. We do have some chemical plants in our service area around here. There could be some leaks, natural gas leaks. That's another big one right there. Could all go south pretty fast.
What if a patient was near a big tanker truck that has a placard, but from just visualizing it, it doesn't look like the tank was like exposed or like open or leaking?
I'm still waiting for somebody to tell me to go near that. Just because it looks like it's not damaged doesn't mean it's not damaged. All right. There are some more ways hazmat can get involved. I don't know if it's going to get into it here, but a big hazmat situation we have in this state is fentanyl. A lot of times we go to cars with unresponsive patients that are covered in powder. And unfortunately in this state, a lot of it is fentanyl or it's carfentanil. And that requires some, you gotta respect that stuff, because if it was enough to make that person go unresponsive, it's enough to make you go unresponsive. So that's where we gotta clean the patient first and get that crap away from us before we go to try and treat the patient. Yeah, a lot of chemicals are stored in many different areas and locations. Good news is we have a good sense of smell, sight, and sound. We got to use that. And chemicals that are typically odorless, that are known about it, they add some sort of a scent to it so we know. Natural gas in itself doesn't have a scent, but usually when you smell natural gas, you smell sulfur or you smell like a rotten egg. That's been added to the natural gas so we know that it's there. Use your senses to figure out what caution you need to take. In case you didn't know, a container is a receptacle that holds a material, because Jones and Bartlett thinks we don't know this at this time. In case you also didn't know that there are two categories, bulk and non-bulk containers. What they use, how big it is, depends on the material it holds. We have that, pretty much everybody knows acid needs to be stored in glass because it eats through everything else. There's just an example there. In case you also didn't know, bulk storage containers are usually store large quantities of something. Depending on the actual material, might be surrounded by some sort of secondary containment system, a box within a box. it wants me to let you guys know that large volume tanks can hold hundreds of gallons to millions of gallons of a product. So think about a small little spill there, a small little oil spill could become pretty bad depending on the size of that container. Ask what one looks like. Here's another container. So what do we think holds more, this one or this one?
The second one?
Yeah, I don't want to mess with whatever's in this container. That looks like it's going to do a lot of damage. Probably don't want to mess with what's in this one either, but there's less of it. Non-bulk containers, we have a lot of these at our bases. This is where we hold our cleaning products. This is where we're going to hold decon products. They should be labeled on bases. If they're not labeled, you add a label and let a supervisor know, because an unlabeled chemical is truly unknown. Even if we know without a shadow of a doubt what's been put in the container, it's not labeled, we can't say for certain that it is known. That's all right, that's enough for that. Here we go. We're going to talk about the placards now. The next slide will have some pictures for you guys. So like I said, labels, placards, they got pictures on it, they got numbers, they got colors on them. Helps us figure out what's in the container. They look like diamonds, and we got a little orange book that we cross-reference to figure out what's in it. We also have binoculars on the truck, so we can look at this from a safe distance and figure out what we're gonna go deal with. And to answer all your questions, that's what they look like. So we would take those numbers, we would take the flame pictures, figure out that means it's flammable. Those specific numbers tell us what exactly it is. And the bottom number tells us, if I remember correctly, it tells us its threat level. Here are some more pictures we could see. Sometimes it flat out says explosive. Other times it tells us it's flammable in words. It tells us it's combustible. Tells us it's radioactive, it's poisonous. Whatever it says, we look at that stuff right there and cross-reference it. Class 1 are always explosive. Class 2 are gases. 3 flammable liquids. 4 flammable solids. 5 are oxidizers. 6 are poisons. 7 radioactive. 8 is corrosive. And 9 is anything else. That's what it's called, the Emergency Response Guidebook, and it's orange. And it's updated every so often, and every truck should have it. Usually in the glove container or the glove compartment. Questions? Good. Now, it's very nice to have these, but the Department of Transportation does not require that everything gets marked. That's unfortunate. It's out of our control. Pretty much self-explanatory there. This is what the book looks like. That's a 2012 copy of it. It's a fairly thick book. Gives you information on 4,000 chemicals. And it tells you everything you need to know about responding, protecting yourself, and in most cases, how to treat this stuff. A lot of chemicals themselves come with material safety data sheet. Those are specific to whatever the chemical is, and it gives people, I should say first responders, chemical makeup of the substance, hazards it protects, it presents, first aid in case you get exposed, and any other data. It's not common that we ourselves are going to read MSDS sheets. It's more common that the fire department is going to read it If you ever go onto a scene and you see a book that's usually behind a cage and it's yellow and black stripes going through it and it says MSDS on it, that's the book I'm talking about. We can access it if we need to, but typically we're not accessing that. Shipping papers, yeah, if you can get a hold of it, by all means, and read through it, absolutely. But that's, you know, names, addresses of the shipper and receiver. Big thing is that it's going to tell you what's being shipped, the amount. It's not really going to tell you how to treat something. We can also somehow contact Chemtrec, Chemical Transportation Emergency Center, operated by the American Chemistry Council, and they're the ones who give information to first responders about anything you ask them for. I do not know how to contact these people at all, so don't ask me that. I can look it up if you really want. You apparently, if you're going to call them, you need to know the name of the chemical involved, name of the caller, callback phone number, the location, the shipper, container type, vehicle that was transporting it, all that happy stuff. I've never used this, so I got no clue how this would even work. Questions on that? We've already said this. Yeah, we've already gone through this. Things you look for: visible clouds, smoke, leaks or spills, unusual odors. You see that, smell any of that, don't go near it. Wait until you're told it's safe to go near it. And we've already said this as well. Any signs of a hazmat incident has occurred, safe distance and park upwind or uphill. What that means is don't park where this odor or this liquid is going to reach your truck and you. Let the hazmat team figure it out. They should go without saying, don't touch this stuff yourself, if at all possible, and don't enter or leave the scene until you're told to. They should also go without saying here, don't let civilians enter the scene. We don't need more people involved. Here's some other things. Ambulances have a PA system. That's a radio that we use to talk to people outside of the ambulance, or that I use to yell at people who can't drive. Tell individuals who are near the scene to get away from the scene, and it helps you secure the scene. It helps you talk to people, secure your zones, all that happy stuff. Speaking of zones, there we go.
I can see you now yelling at those people, Will.
I had to yell at people on Wednesday. I had to yell at people on Wednesday. They wouldn't get out of the way. So, hot zone is the red zone. That is where the hazardous material is located. That's where you go with the hazmat suit on if you have been trained. The warm zone, that is where people are being deconned. The cold zone, that is where the IC is. That is where the commander is. And that's where you are treating people. We just said all that. We haven't figured this out yet. Let's reiterate this. Your role as an EMT is what? Treat, transport, triage, and rehab. Questions on that? National Fire Protection Association 704 has their hazmat material classification standards, and they go over health hazard, toxic levels, fire hazard, chemical hazards, all that stuff. In short, there are things that the firefighters can throw water on, and there are things they can't throw water on, and they have to follow that. You certainly don't want to throw water on something that doesn't play well with water and cause a big explosion that creates more problems. Toxic levels. Couple different levels here. Level 0 means that this material is going to cause basically nothing to happen. Level 1 is only going to be contact irritation with or without treatment, nothing too bad. Level 2, going to cause some temporary damage unless you get treatment. Level 3, very hazardous to health. Level 4 is the most extreme. The minimal of contact will cause death. And it also goes without saying here, anything except level 0 requires special training and special gear. Gear that we don't have on most ambulances. There we go. For my firefighters in the audience today, you guys will learn about SCBAs and level C suits, because this is what you guys are going to be doing on the trucks. We don't have any of that on the ambulance. PPE, we need it, we use it as we need it. Level A PPE, most hazardous, those are the full body hazmat suits with the SCBA, self-contained breathing apparatus. We don't have any of these on the trucks. Level B protects against specific hazards. Eye protection also has SCBA. The big difference is that it's usually not a full body hazmat suit. Level C, pretty much what we wear on the trucks. We do have face masks that filter inhaled air. Those are N95 masks. Level D is sort of just a basic gown that we have. Those are the 4 levels. Level A, full body hazmat. Level B, see, it's not really full body because the headpiece can be detached. Level C doesn't have any breathing apparatus there except for a filter. And level D is what we carry on the trucks. Not the one piece though. We don't wear one pieces on the trucks. Caring for patients. Simple assessment, essential care, decon, that's it. This stuff's dangerous and time is of the essence. How do we care for patients? Well, any trauma that's happened, we gotta fix that. Any medical problem that's happened, we gotta fix that. We gotta remove them from the situation. They gotta be deconned. Standard treatments. Yeah, most injuries and deaths from hazmats are because of airway or breathing problems. Those are the biggest concerns. We know how to manage an airway. We know how to fix breathing problems. It is rare, but a hazmat team might find people who need treatment even before decon has occurred. That is where we take the patient and we let the hospital know, and that's where you're going to get the chemical shower at the hospital. All right. Yes, the more bad the incident is, the more protective clothing you will need to wear. Put on a couple pairs of gloves, respiratory protection, put on your aprons, face, eye protection. We don't have SCBA, so don't worry about that on our ambulances. Questions, comments, concerns? Let's do a couple questions. What is the role of ICS? Who likes answer A? Answer B? C? I like answer D. ICS, ensure responder, public safety is all met.
Well, question for you.
What's up?
On the NREMT exam,
Mhm.
there's all the above. Is it, I feel like on all the exam, the questions we get, it's always all the above answer for the most part.
The question was, if the answer is all of the above on the NREMT, is it the correct answer? Probably. I would wager that. All right. The rest of the Jones and Bartlett questions, personally, I don't like. So it's 9:37. Be back at 9:50, okay? I'll take the no answer as everybody's okay with it. Everybody back?
Yes.
Excellent. Terrorism and disaster management. What do we do about it? At some point, we may be going to some sort of a terrorist incident. Very difficult to plan for these, but it is important to plan for these because it will likely happen. In all of our lifetimes, it has happened. Whether we were here in Boston or not, it happened in 2013. What do we do to these? Oh, here we go. First, we got to define terrorism. Been going on since early civilizations. Department of Justice says international terrorism and domestic terrorism are a little bit different, but they both involve violent acts that are dangerous to human life that violate federal and state law. This is done to intimidate or coerce civilians, to influence government policy, and to conduct government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. International terrorist outside of the US. Domestic terrorism inside the United States. Big key here, only a small percentage of terroristic groups actually achieve their goals. What kind of groups are they? Religious extremist groups, doomsday cults, the big one, cyber groups, single issue people, all of that. What do they use? Weapons of mass destruction. It's any weapon that can cause mass casualties. Massive damage and massive amounts of money lost. There's quite a few mnemonics that we have for all of these. The easiest one is CBRNE, chemical, burns, radiation, nuclear, or explosion. You can also use Be Nice as well, get you the same place. The I would be incendiary, which is the same as burns. Explosives are the most common. They're most preferred because they kill a lot of people for very little input.
Will, are you going through a PowerPoint right now? Because we can't see it.
I am. Hold on. You can see it?
Oh, you're in a different slide, that's why.
Let me
Yeah, we
press.
see it now.
All right, let me press the button again and see if it works. Everybody there?
Yeah, I can see it now.
All right, good.
Thank you.
I'll go back a couple slides here. So, I mean, we really didn't miss a whole lot. Nobody saw any of these slides?
No.
All right. Didn't really miss a lot. I defined it all. What is terrorism? Not good. They want to kill people, want to influence people. Who are they? Religious extremists, cyber terrorists, all that stuff. They use weapons of mass destruction. Those are the mnemonics: Be Nice, CBRNE. We prefer CBRNE. It's the easier one to figure out. All right. Where was I? All right. Explosions is preferred because it kills a lot of people for small input. Chemicals, also commonly used. Those are the different chemicals that we can use: blistering agents, respiratory agents, nerve agents, metabolic agents. Blisters causes burns. Respiratory agents chokes people. Nerve agents, a lot of that is pesticides, and cyanides just mess with our metabolism. Not pleasant. That is the C. The B, biologic weapons, viruses, bacteria, and toxins. that are weaponized. Biologic agents are usually ones that have no treatments and no known cures. It'd be a little embarrassing to release the common cold as a form of terrorism. We can't cure the common cold, we can certainly treat it. Nuclear and radiation. There's a big difference here between nuclear and radiation. Nuclear is an explosion. To date, there's only been 2 known nuclear explosions ever intentionally made. Can you guess which country did it?
We did. Hiroshima.
We did. That was the US. We're the only
And somewhere
people.
in Vietnam.
Hmm?
I said Hiroshima. Wasn't that one of them?
Yep, and Nagasaki. We're the only
Nagasaki.
country that's ever intentionally detonated a nuclear bomb. Radiation, on the other hand, is not an explosion. It releases radioactive material. We call those dirty bombs. Causes a lot of panic, and the big thing about it is that no one knows it got released until it got detected. And when does it get detected? Not very common. Radiation causes a lot of issues with people's bodies. Right. How do we respond to this kind of stuff? Well, treatment is very varied, very wide, very varied. Got to be making sure that we have situational awareness. These kind of incidences definitely can turn south pretty fast. Oftentimes, these incidences were planned without anybody's knowledge and enacted without anybody's knowledge until it occurred. Always check your surroundings. And if you really want to know what the current threat level is, check out the Department of Homeland Security. They will let you know what today's threat level is to the United States, if you're so inclined. I'm pretty sure that a lot of agencies get issued this kind of warning from NTAS, National Terrorism Advisory System. In 2011, this replaced the color-coded Homeland Security Advisory System. And this is how we get our alerts from the feds as to what's going on. Fortunately, these aren't very common. We don't know it by now. We need to figure out the location, the kind of call, number of patients, victims' statements, and any pre-incident indicators. Not really a whole lot of pre-incident indicators are found before the incident. They're typically found after. It says you're supposed to make sure you are aware of information sent out by the advisory system at the start of your workday. I've personally never checked that whenever I've punched in, but if you are so inclined, be my guest. All right, so if we haven't figured out yet, scene safety, and if we didn't drill this into your heads last lecture, we'll reiterate it. Stage your vehicle a safe distance away, uphill, upstream. Wait for law enforcement, wait for fire. If you don't feel safe, don't go there. And understand that just because you're staring at the incident doesn't mean that there isn't something else ready to go off. Boston Marathon, the first explosion went off, then the second one went off, and they found a couple more of their pressure cookers that didn't blow. Those are called secondary devices, and they were nowhere near the finish line. So keep that in mind. That certainly looks fun. But this is staging. So The ambulance there is uphill, upwind from that tanker that overturned, and that's pretty good position right there. Questions? Responder safety. Well, the best form of protection is to don't come in contact with the agent. Second best form of protection, wear PPE. The greatest threats to you when we deal with weapons of mass destruction are either you get contaminated yourself or you get cross-contaminated because you weren't being safe. All right, we gotta let dispatcher know what the nature of the event is. Let them know, hey, we're posting up at Woodlawn Cemetery. We just heard an explosion go off. Somebody needs to come in this area. You all who work here, you'll learn what the Woodlawn Post means soon enough. It basically means go sit across from the cemetery's entrance and you're covering Revere, Chelsea, Everett, and Malden at the same time. Good luck. Let them know we need some more resources there. If you know how many patients are there, let them know how many you think. Give them a rough area. Figure out where you're going to stage and go from there. Keep your eyes peeled for a secondary device that could go off. So let's say, for instance, we got a couple of you working together on a truck together, and you're with your partner from this class. You all hear an explosion. You got to take command. You're the first truck on scene until someone else shows up. Whoever's in the driver's seat is going to become the incident commander, and whoever is in the passenger seat is going to start triaging. Everyone else comes in when they need to come in. Like I said, you want to hold command of the scene right now, be my guest. Otherwise, give it up to someone else who shows up. Questions on that? Constantly reassess scene safety. We can't say this enough on weapons of mass destructions and terroristic incidences. Chemical agents, liquids, gases dispersed that want to kill people or injure people. We got difference between volatiles and non-volatiles. Something that's volatile evaporates pretty quick. Non-volatile does not evaporate. Pretty much do the same thing no matter what. Chemicals have multiple different routes of exposure on the skin, through the nose, through the eyes, injected, all of that stuff. Multiple ways they can get into the body and cause their damage. A vesicant goes through the skin. It causes burns, causes respiratory issues. There you go. What else does it do? Yeah, we covered that. Sulfur mustards, brownish yellow oily substance. That's why they're called mustards. They are very persistent. They're not very volatile. And they are usually irreversible. Once they get in, they go to the bone marrow and they deplete our body's ability to create white blood cells. And without white blood cells, we really can't fight off infections. That's why sulfur mustards are pretty bad substances. Leukocytes and, yeah, I can't pronounce that other one there. Those are blister wounds, very similar to mustards. They cause immediate pain though. Difference is that patients have grayish discoloration at the contaminated site. Mustards typically don't. Respiratory agents, gases that cause harm to the person's lungs. They can only get in one way, that's through the respiratory tract. So we're going to have airway problems, we're going to have breathing problems, and we're going to have lung problems. Lungs are not going to sound good, airway is going to be burnt, person's going to be in respiratory distress, respiratory failure, depending on how bad the exposure was. One of the classical chemicals here is chlorine gas. It was the first one ever used in warfare. Starts with its upper airway situation. People feel like they're choking, and then it progresses down, causes complete airway obstruction, pulmonary edema, and eventually death if it's not treated. Phosgene is a product of combustion. Very potent, very delayed onset of symptoms. You're exposed, patients get exposed, and it could take hours before symptoms show up. Everything else so far, symptoms are pretty fast. Smells like freshly mown grass or hay, but this is not freshly mown grass or hay at all. Eventually, we come to pulmonary edema with this stuff, and patients start coughing up white or pink fluid. Doesn't look good. As it continues to progress, hypovolemic, hypotensive, and we need to treat this when we can. Nerve agents. These are probably the most deadly chemicals to have ever been developed, because they kill very fast, within seconds, put patient into cardiac arrest. Can enter any route of exposure, on the skin, through the nose, through the eyes, through the mouth, injected, all that stuff. Around here, you are very unlikely to see it, but pesticides are a big thing. They are our nerve agents. They're called organophosphates. That's most likely what you're going to come into contact with. There are other agents like sarin gas, volatile, colorless, very dangerous. Not a lot we're going to do except move fast to a hospital. We obviously, for this kind of stuff, we need hazmat, a lot of hazmat protection. Here's some other nerve agents there in different odors that they give off. All immediate symptoms. Now, when we have some sort of a nerve exposure, we have a little mnemonic we got to learn. It's called SLUDGEM. Stands for salivation, sweating, lacrimation, urination, defecation, drooling, or diarrhea, gastric upset, emesis, and much muscle twitching / meiosis, pinpoint pupils. This is the kind of stuff you look for. Pretty much means nervous system isn't doing what it needs to do. And why? Well, because enzymes have been blocked that don't break down acetylcholine. And once that stuff starts to accumulate, all this starts happening. I know it says medical mnemonic is dumbbells, but pretty much EMS, we learned SLUDGEM. You can learn dumbbells if you want. They'll get you to the same place. Questions, comments, concerns? Metabolic agents, cyanide and cyanogen chloride. They affect our ability to use oxygen. We need a lot of oxygen in our cells just so that our cells can do their most basic functions. And when we mess with oxygen's ability to do its job, the cell dies relatively quickly. And when a lot of cells start dying, a lot of people start dying. Gases are deadly, very small doses. They are colorless, but there are odors very similar to that of bitter almonds. A lot of industrial settings, cyanides exist naturally. They are also a byproduct of plastic processing and combustion, and very, very low doses can cause pretty severe symptoms. We do have treatments that exist. We don't carry them, but there are treatments that exist. Questions, comments, concerns? Biologic agents. Very hard to detect because not really a lot of odors, and these things are microscopic. A lot of times, minor illness. A lot of infectious agents start with flu-like symptoms or colds. And then depending on the infectious agent, it can absolutely get worse and worse. Hopefully there are treatments for them. We could also spread things through vectors. Those are animals that spread disease to another animal or that spread diseases to us. How easy a disease can spread from person to person is called communicability. We do see a lot of infectious agents, very communicable. They spread relatively easily. Another big issue with biologic agents is that the agent itself needs time to incubate before it causes symptoms. So think about COVID. They were telling us that it takes 2 to 14 days after exposure before symptoms could begin to set in. Person could easily be walking around there for up to 2 weeks, spreading this condition to everybody else. That's what makes biologic agents pretty bad. Questions? Viruses. They need to enter a host to multiply and survive. They have to invade our cells to replicate themselves, and then they can spread. How they spread: direct contact, respiratory droplets through vectors, bloodborne, all that happy stuff. There's smallpox, doesn't really exist anymore. If we were to see smallpox, it would most definitely be an act of biological terrorism. The last time I checked, there's only 2 countries that admit to still having smallpox. That would be the US and Russia. So if we ever saw this again, probably means something didn't go good. Very contagious, but there is a vaccine against it. Smallpox vaccine. You need all the PPE. You got those blisters that show up, eventually high fever, body ache, eventually those blisters rupture, and that's what causes it to spread. They can cause scarring. No known treatment or cures, just supportive care. Aerosolized warfare is not a good form of terrorism. Wouldn't be good. Smallpox is aerosolized, highly infectious, can spread through blankets, person to person, has to be inhaled or direct contact with the blisters. Fever, body aches, headaches, all that stuff. Look at the incubation period, 10 to 12 days, and then you're sick for 4 weeks. So for 10 to 12 days, you don't even know you have it, and you're actively spreading it. Viral hemorrhagic fevers. This is Ebola, this is Rift Valley, this is Marburg. These don't look good. Initially, flu-like symptoms. And why you have flu-like symptoms, these viruses are causing your blood to seep out of your tissues and out of the blood vessels. Eventually, these patients look like they are bleeding and leaking fluid from everywhere. It's uncontrolled as well. All standard precautions need to be taken, need to be thoroughly deconned. How does this spread though? Mostly through infected body fluids. There is a way to aerosolize this. I don't know how that's done. Someone does. Person-to-person contact or contaminated items doesn't really spread that well without a body fluid there. Have to touch the body fluid to spread it. Eventually you hit fever, muscle weakness, sore throat, vomiting, and massive internal and external bleeding. There's another good news. This really doesn't exist in the US. No treatments, no cures, supportive care, treat for shock. Questions on viruses? Right. Bacteria. Unlike viruses, bacteria does not need a host to multiply. They are also much larger and more complex than viruses. Most can be fought off with antibiotics, so we do have treatments for it. And we have that flu-like symptoms that show up. The most common example is anthrax, very deadly, causes 3 forms: cutaneous anthrax, which isn't really bad. It's bad, but it isn't really lethal. GI anthrax, which is somewhere in the middle, and finally pulmonary anthrax. It is the most deadly. There are antibiotics against it. If left untreated, anthrax, 90% death rate, that would be pulmonary. Spreads through the aerosolized form. Really only spreads from person to person in the cutaneous form. You got to inhale a spore. Flu-like symptoms, progressing to shock and respiratory failure unless it is treated. If you can think back a couple years ago, there were some politicians in the US who received envelopes full of some sort of white powderous substance. They tested it and found out it was anthrax. I don't think that they ever figured out who sent it to them, but it has been in recent years. The plague still exists. Happens very common in the Southwest. Rodents and fleas carry it. We're talking about the bubonic plague, creates those black sores on people's bodies. Doesn't look good, can be treated though. It is contagious. The more contagious version of plague is the pulmonary plague or the pneumonic plague, which is a lung infection. And that one is far more contagious person to person and has a much higher death rate. That's what they look like. Those are the spots. Aerosolized. You can ingest it, inhale it, or get it on your skin. Fever, headache, muscle pain, pneumonia, shortness of breath. Got the black enlarged bubonic spots all over the person's body. Standard precautions. There are antibiotics against this. Oxygen in transport. I don't think there are any cases in Massachusetts, but there are certainly cases that exist throughout the entire United States, mostly in the Southwest though. Questions on bacteria? Neurotoxins, most deadly substance known to humans. Plants, marine animals, molds, bacteria, all create it. We can ingest it, inhale it, or inject it. These are not contagious, but they are pretty fast. What is the most common one? Botox, produced by bacteria. What does it do? It shuts down our nervous system. You lose voluntary control over your muscles. which eventually means you can't breathe and enter respiratory distress or respiratory arrest. And if you have respiratory arrest, you're not breathing, you die. Low doses, people get Botox treatments all the time. That's what they're giving. Here you go. Doesn't spread from person to person. Dry mouth, nausea, vomiting, pupil problems, drooping eyelids, difficulty speaking, swallowing, respiratory failure, paralysis. Can we actually treat it? Not really. We have to give ventilatory support. But the big news is there's a vaccine against Botox. Another big one is ricin. It's derived from the castor bean, and when it goes into the body, it causes respiratory, circulatory failure, and death. Very stable, very toxic, very much need small doses. Is there a treatment against it? No, just supportive care. No vaccines against it. Can't spread person to person. Usually is released through air or contaminated food and water. Questions on neurotoxins? Other roles besides treating: surveillance, keep an eye on the patient, report all the symptoms. Helps hospitals figure it out. Dispatch needs to be aware of an unusual number of calls from patients with an unexplainable number of symptoms. That's usually how these incidences are found. Right there, because we go for 5 calls in a row for something that sounds like it's just flu-like symptoms all from the same location, raises some concerns. Points of distribution, we don't really establish that, but this is how we get massive doses of antibiotics, antidotes, and vaccines to everybody. There is something called the National Stockpile. Takes about 12 hours to be deployed. From request to deployment and setup, about 12 hours. We could be called to help people distribute this and actually administer it, but usually that's going to be a National Guard thing. We'll be in the supportive role, that sort of stuff. Questions on that? Radiation, nuclear devices. What's bad about radiation? Well, only if it's ionizing. Ionizing radiation causes DNA damage. That's the problem. When we destroy DNA, the cell dies. Why does this occur? Because things are unstable, the actual atoms are unstable, and they release either an alpha particle, a beta particle, or a gamma ray. Alpha is the least harmful, beta is somewhere in the middle, gamma is the worst, and neutrons are the most powerful. Alpha particle, a simple sheet of paper, is enough to protect you. Beta particles, your clothing can protect you. Gamma particles, you need to be behind some pretty thick concrete, and neutrons can go through anything. Once we use radioactive material, got to be put in radioactive waste. The problem is it takes hundreds, if not thousands of years for this stuff to become safe to be handled. Where do we find this radioactive stuff? Well, hospitals and healthcare facilities that have a radiology department. We just named every hospital in the country. X-ray machines, all has that happy stuff with it. colleges and universities, nuclear power plants. We have a nuclear reactor right over in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's called MIT. And their point of entry for any radiation issue there is Mount Auburn Hospital or Mass General if it's trauma. If you have smoke detectors in your house, you have a radioactive device in your house. There's a very small amount of radiation in smoke detectors. So this stuff is everywhere. And it can be used. How does it get dispersed? We already talked about dirty bombs. In addition to the dirty bomb explosion, it releases all of that radiation. Not so sure I agree with this as being ineffective because it is dispersing radioactive material, but I'm not going to argue with Jones and Bartlett. Nuclear energy, split an atom to release energy. We use it in medicine all the time. That's how X-rays are created, to take pictures. They use it in power plants to create energy. They use it on Navy vessels to power them. And we use it to bomb people. Not really good. Good news is the likelihood of an actual nuclear attack is pretty small. The world still remembers what we did back in the 1940s, and I don't think anybody wants to see that get repeated. There are different levels of radiation, and obviously the greater the exposure, the quicker the radiation does kill a person, and different symptoms come from that as well. Radiation can enter the body anyway. Does not matter. Inject it, inhale it, eat it, all of that stuff. Low exposure, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, dizziness, headache, not too bad. Moderate exposure, we start to see burns. That's when hair loss comes into play, immune compromise, increased risk of cancer. Severe exposure, major burns, cancer, and death. Moderate exposure will kill eventually. Just because a person has been exposed to radiation does not mean they are actually radioactive themselves. It just means they have been exposed. If you've ever had an X-ray, you have been exposed to radiation, but you certainly probably went home after the X-ray and didn't cause anybody else to become exposed to radiation. We still do need to decon in case some sort of radioactive material got on the patient's clothing or skin. Absolutely. Start treating with the ABCs, and you will need PPE appropriately to treat this, and then you got to dispose of it in very special containers. Radiation, there's nothing that definitively protects us from it. Time is really what's going on here. The longer you're exposed to it, the more severe the effects are going to be. So get in and get out pretty fast. Stay far away from this. And right there, use thick concrete shielding. That is the most protective device you can use. Questions on radiation or nuclear weapons? Incendiary and explosive devices. Incendiary devices start fires. Explosions cause explosions. You see a device that looks suspicious, probably is suspicious, notify people and get away from it. This is where secondary devices come in. It says here you're supposed to keep a lookout for people who are walking around with flamethrowers and Molotov cocktails. Sure, if I were to see that, I'd probably run in the other direction. Primary blast injury. Once that explosion happens, there's a pressure wave that hits the body. That causes damage in the hollow organs. lungs being the worst. Secondary blast injury happens from debris, whether it's penetrating trauma or non-penetrating trauma. Tertiary injury is the whole body displacement because the body smacked into the environmental object, like a car or a wall, causes some sort of a crush. And then the quaternary blast injury, anything else that occurs because of the blast. Think about a blast that was hard enough to maybe cause a burn or cause someone to have an instant heart attack. That would be the quaternary. Here we go. For you physicists out there, there's the physics of the explosion. Blasts are in a sphere and they fly out in a spherical wave. Flying debris follows the same thing. When a substance is detonated, it is converted into gas under high pressure. For you physics people, sure, we can explain that later. Hollow organs, middle ear, lungs, GI tract, most susceptible to pressure changes. This is why a lot of explosions cause a loud pop in people's ears and they can't hear things after that. These blasts cause a lot of GI bleeding, lung problems. What else? Once the lung problems are there, patient's going to report of chest tightness, chest pain, cough up blood, collapsed lungs, hematomas, all that stuff shows up. Blasts, most common form of death from a blast injury is a lung injury. Secondary is neurologic and head trauma. Everything else is not really common. Amputations are common though. What do we look for in these kind of patients? We treat them for shock, treat them for bleeding, treat them for amnesia, and put tourniquets on if we've got some amputations. Questions, comments, concerns? Time is now 10:30. Be back at 10:50, okay? Good. Everybody back?
Hello.
All right. Transport operations. This will be a quick one. Today's ambulances are stocked with standard medical supplies, trauma stuff, airway stuff, oxygen, gloves, masks, you name it, it's there. Splinting stuff. We put emphasis on rapid response today as opposed to years ago, and that puts the EMT in pretty good danger. Well, there's a definition of an ambulance for anybody who was concerned. Vehicle used for treating and transporting patients who need to go to a hospital. Today's ambulances are based on NFPA 1917. Standard for automotive ambulances. Does anybody know what ambulances used to be before all this happy stuff started? Modern ambulances?
What do you mean, like the horse and carriage one?
That was one. Ambulances used to be hearses. They were funeral directors. The thought
No way.
yeah, not kidding. The thought process was if you died on the way to the hospital, you went to the funeral home. We've come a long way since then. All right. Emergency vehicle design. There you go. First responder vehicles have personnel and equipment to treat patients until an ambulance can arrive. Yes. Fire trucks have medical equipment on them because they usually get there before we get there. They obviously can't transport people in a fire truck, but they can certainly care for them. Modern ambulance. Well, you got to have a driver's compartment, hopefully. Should have a patient compartment big enough for 2 EMTs and 2 supine patients. I've been saying that all along. Equipment and supplies, two-way radio communication. You need to be able to talk to dispatch. You need to be able to talk to the fire department. You also need to be able to talk to that CMED thing I talked about, CMED. And designed for maximum safety and comfort. I don't know about that last one. You also need to put the Star of Life on every ambulance. Has to be blue. It is on the back windows. It is on the sides, and it has to exist. There is also certification standards that are established by the state and the feds in order to call an ambulance an ambulance. Phases of an ambulance call. Prepare for the call. That's what you do when you first punch in. Make sure your truck is checked. Dispatch. That's when they tell you you're going on a call. En route, you're driving. Arrival, you're there. Transfer the patient to the ambulance. You put the patient in the ambulance. Going to receiving facility, that's your transport. You arrive, it means you drop the patient off. You then clear the hospital, go back to the station, and post run, do your documentation. Repeat every call that you do. Preparation phase, like I said, make sure your equipment and supplies are ready. Things that aren't there, things that don't work, you need to report because you could be out of service until new equipment shows up. Your equipment needs to be cleaned and sanitized as much as possible. The back of the trucks are very filthy. That's what a cabinet looks like, should look like. The labels don't really exist on cabinet shelves, but it's nice and organized. That would be trauma equipment, and it should stay organized like that as you find out throughout your time in EMS. Most people just throw anything they want in the cabinets and say, it is what it is, and make the cabinets look like a hot mess. Don't do that. Keep your truck nice and clean. Go from there. Keep it well stocked. We usually store equipment depending on where the patient lies. So the cabinets that are the closest to the patient's head is where airway and oxygen equipment goes. And the rest of the cabinets are for everything else. That way there, when you're sitting at the patient's head, you can easily access it. That's also where the truck's oxygen supply is going to be stored as well, and the suction supply will be right next to the patient's head. There you go. That's all the stuff you need to check. All equipment, all airway equipment, CPR, wound equipment. That thing right there on top is a portable suction, and that thing on the bottom is an old CPR board. We don't really have those anymore. Our stretchers are firm enough where we can do CPR right on the stretcher, and patient will be fine. More medical equipment. Those are the splints. That's a birthing kit. They're not showing an AED. Even more medical equipment. That's a first in bag, contains your medications. You need a stretcher to do a call. There's no way around it. You need long boards, back boards, stair chairs. Make sure it's all there. We commonly go to trucks to make shift that are missing things. People don't check their trucks. Then they show up on scene missing a stretcher. And it's very hard to say, oops, when you're on scene. Personal safety equipment, you need gloves, you need gowns, masks, all that stuff there. Navigation equipment, there's a good news. Everybody has navigation equipment in their pocket. That's called your cell phone. Don't rely on the truck's GPS because half of them don't have GPS. They should have map books though, so it might be pertinent to learn how to read a map. Should also make sure you got helmets in every truck. Make sure you have a high vis vest. Make sure we have flashlights. Make sure you look for binoculars and that great thing that we all love, the tough book, so you can document your calls. And fire extinguishers. It says here, make sure there are fire extinguishers on the truck. When we transport a patient, one of you is in the back with the patient, the other person is driving the truck at all times. We don't leave patients in the back to fend for themselves. It's not 1918 anymore, it's 2021. Clean your trucks, clean the equipment, just check the function of all your supplies. We don't want to say oops because the AED doesn't work on a cardiac arrest. That's the quickest way to have to make a call to the state. Yeah, everything needs to be secured. Everything needs to be in proper working order, and stay safe. Any questions on preparing the truck? Dispatch. Dispatch must be easy to access and in service 24 hours a day. There is always a dispatcher on the radio, 24/7. To the best of their ability, they get the nature of the call, the name, the location, the callback number, how many patients, the severity, to the best of their ability. There are times when they can't get everything. They do their best. Be patient with them. We had on Wednesday, I was working, we had several calls where the callers were strictly just yelling at the dispatchers and weren't giving them any information at all. Try taking that call, everyone, for 24 hours a day. You'll probably go insane. En route to the scene, this is the most dangerous job that we do, driving with the lights and sirens. This is where the crashes occur. And unfortunately, in Massachusetts, we are at fault if we hit anything or get hit while our lights and siren are on. Because when they check the call and review it, there is the phrase "with due regard," and they will compare you to another EMT of similar training and a similar circumstance. They will conclude that the other EMT wouldn't have done what you did, which makes you at fault. The lights and siren does not mean we get to blow red lights and stop signs. We still have to stop and clear the intersections. You need to wear your seatbelts. No discussions on that. When you get on scene safety, BSI, figure out if you need more people there, figure out what you need to bring to the scene. We talked about MCIs. Communicate this. Find the incident commander. Park away. Don't park alongside a crash. Go away from it. Best place to park for a crash is in front of it. That way there you can load the patient and move. You see the fire truck at the angle? That is what most fire departments will do. That serves two functions. A, it makes sure people can't slow down and look at what we're doing. And B, you got to hit a fire truck pretty hard to make that thing move. So it keeps us all safe. Nobody's putting cones up. Sorry. But if we got cones, we would put them up. Wear your high visibility vest for stuff like this. We already said it, uphill, upwind. Leave the lights on for the truck. Shut the siren off, leave the lights on. Go rapid for scene. It is always necessary to block traffic. That's what the fire department's gonna do, that's what the police are gonna do. There you go. Questions about arriving on scene? Transfer phase. If we're taking the patient, we need to package them and transport them. However it may be, on a scoop, on a backboard, on the stretcher itself, we got to make sure we package them. They need to be secured with 5 straps, 2 over the shoulders, 1 over the hips, 1 over the legs, and a second one over the hips too, based on our stretchers that we have right now. Anything less is unacceptable. Anything more is great. Anything less is unacceptable. In Mass, patients are not allowed to move themselves, so we have to assist them or move them for themselves. You have to be prepared to lift people. You also have to make sure that the stretcher is secured in the truck. Transport. When we're going to the hospital, let dispatch know where you're going, how many patients you're taking with you, and that you're actually going. Mileage, we don't require that here at Cataldo. It used to be when we had a section 12, we had to put our mileage to dispatch at the beginning and the end. I don't know if it's still done that anymore, but a section 12 is we take the patient against their will. Obviously, while we're going to the destination, every 3 to 5 for unstable, every 15 minutes for a stable patient, contact the receiving hospital. And that's where you call them over the radio or call them on the cell phone. Let them know that you're coming. You do not have to contact any of the big hospitals in Boston unless it is a priority patient, major trauma, cardiac arrest, stroke, imminent childbirth, airway issues, or severely unstable patient. Grandma fall down, go boom, has no injury. She just wants to get checked out. Mass General doesn't care that you're coming with that. Grandma been shot 5 times, got no blood pressure. Mass General needs to know about that. Those are the differences. Questions on that? Right.
We shooting grandmas.
I'm not shooting grandmas, and I hope no one in this class is shooting grandmas.
Just the fact that you would use that. He's like shooting grandma.
Could happen. Could happen. Delivery phase. You gotta let dispatch know when you arrive at the hospital. When you get there, you gotta talk to the triage nurse. They're always just warm and bubbly and waiting for you to show up. You're gonna give them a report. They're gonna type something onto a computer. They may or may not be listening to what you have to say. They're gonna tell you where to take the patient to their bed or their hallway bed. You move them there. There may be a second nurse who's gonna listen to what you have to say. There may not. It depends on the hospital. Different hospitals do different things. You then need to write your patient care report, documentation, documentation, documentation. Everything that occurred on the call, write it down. We don't document because the doctor needs to read about this in an hour when they get the facts. We document so when this call goes to court in 7 years, we remember what we did. And if it wasn't written down, it didn't happen. Restock items if possible. Yeah, you need to restock items. Don't leave a mess for the next crew to have to clean up.
When we have a mass casualty incident, like where we're triaging people, do we do a detailed patient care report if we're just in transferring people?
Not necessarily. You write as much as needs to be written, and that's pretty much it. All right. En route to the station, you clear the hospital, tell dispatch you're in service and where you're going. Newsflash, dispatch is telling you where you're going. You're going to go where they send you to. Back at the station, clean and disinfect the ambulance equipment. You should have done that at the hospital. Restock supplies, that occurs at the station. By all means, clean your truck again when you get back to base. Absolutely. Don't leave messes for oncoming crews to have to clean up. It's not fun. Post run, complete your paperwork. The only way we get paid is when paperwork is complete. And I think we all want to be paid. Simple as that. Inform dispatch again of your status. No, we don't do that here at Cataldo. Routine inspections, refuel the vehicle. Yeah, we do that. Make sure your vehicle's running. And here at Cataldo, you are not allowed to leave a truck with less than a quarter of a tank of gas. You will be written up for stuff like that. Trucks have to be ready to go.
Is there specific places where they go, or they go regular gas station?
Regular gas stations. Trucks have a fuel card in it. You swipe it at the gas station and you fill it up with regular gas. We don't have any diesels anymore in the fleet. There you go. Clean. We're just removing blood or anything visible. Disinfect. We're killing anything pathogenic that is there, usually with some sort of a chemical. High level disinfect. We don't really do that on the trucks. We got to send that out. Same thing with sterilization. It has to be sent out. We're not ORs. We don't reuse any of our stuff that's been sterilized. That's operating room stuff. After the call, yeah, strip linens from the stretcher. That's disgusting. Don't put the same, patients on the same 3 sheets just because you don't want to change them. Medical waste has to be thrown away in correct containers. If it's biohazard, it goes into the red container. If it's not biohazard, it is regular trash. Contaminated areas need to be cleaned with disinfectants. We have sprays on the trucks. We have wipes on the trucks. Use them. Clean the stretcher, any spillage. Everybody gets it. Create a schedule for routine full cleaning of the emergency vehicle. Well, unfortunately, that doesn't really happen. But if you work the same truck all the time, maybe you're the one who decides, I'm in this truck 3 days a week. One of these days, I'm going to deep clean the truck. You should do that. We do have written policies and procedures here at Cataldo. You will get that when you get the employee manual, unless you've already gotten access to it. I don't actually know the answer to that question. All right, questions on calls?
The documentation stuff, do we have something with us to document?
You have a what's called a tough book. It's a laptop in your truck,
Okay.
and you get your PCR, the patient care report is sent to you by dispatch, all electronic.
Inside that laptop.
Yes. All right. Defensive driving. Look at that. That's an ambulance that got rolled over. Why is this bad? Because it's going to hurt the EMTs, delay patient care, could harm other motorists, pedestrians. It could even hurt a patient that you have in the back. You will, when you go through orientation, you will go through a defensive driving program called EVOS, Emergency Vehicle Operator Safety. You must sit through that and pass it in order to be able to drive the truck here at Cataldo. There are too many crashes that occur, and we got to cut the numbers down. Massachusetts, I mean, that's not a state requirement. It is a Cataldo requirement. You also need to be mature and stable enough to drive the truck yourself. You need to drive with due regard, not only for your safety, but the safety of others. You have to remain alert. If you're on medications that cause drowsiness or slow your reaction time, it's a good thing to let Cataldo know before you get cut loose on the street, so they can decide if you should be driving or not. That's a conversation between you and higher powers than myself. This should go without saying. Never drive after you have been drinking or doing drugs. Never drive the truck on those conditions. And if you're working very long shifts, we often do 24-hour shifts. Maybe at the end of your shift, you might need to ask your partner to drive if you're just too tired. We'd rather be safe than be sorry. Speed does not save lives. The lights and siren get us to the hospital maybe 60 seconds faster than without it. Maybe. So we're only using it when there is a legitimate threat to life or limb. Seatbelts save lives. You got to wear seatbelts. In the back of the trucks, there are harnesses that you can wear. And if you have the chance to put a harness on the back of the truck, you should put it on. Ambulances are slow to accelerate, very top heavy, slow to stop, and don't take corners very well, especially the big boxes. Keep that in mind. Our stopping distance is a lot more than the small cars that everybody drives. We try to stay to the most extreme left-handed lane when we're using lights and siren because people are supposed to pull over to the right. It's not always possible. You will go through driver training where you see scenarios where that's not possible, and you will learn the caution there when it's time. Siren risk benefit depends on a couple of factors. First things, the patient condition. All right, let's go back to that condition where we talked about grandma fall down, went boom, doesn't have any injuries. We're not using lights and siren to get to the hospital. However, like I said, grandma got shot 5 times. We're going to use the lights and siren to get her to the hospital. Although why grandma's getting shot, I don't know how I came up with that scenario in my mind. Local protocols, I don't believe Massachusetts specifies when we should and should not use lights and siren. I believe they put in the protocol. Oh, they do. They do. It's in the protocol. Read the protocol. I usually shut them off when I'm transferring patients anyway. Driver anticipation. Here we go. Always assume that motorists around your vehicle haven't heard your siren or seen you. Once the lights and siren get turned on, nobody remembers how to drive. And everybody starts to freeze. They slam their brakes in front of you. They start panicking. It's a mess. Keep that in mind. Use the PA system sparingly. Don't yell at people like I do. And always drive defensively. This is not your emergency. There's no need to turn this into your emergency because now we need to cut you out of an ambulance. Cushion of safety. You need to maintain a nice distance between yourself and the vehicles in front of you. Sometimes people are going to try to tailgate us because we got the lights and siren going and they get right behind us because they're going to cut the line of traffic. Don't do that at all. I just pulled open the protocol here. It is protocol 1 for the state of Massachusetts. Use of lights and sirens should be justified by the need for immediate medical intervention that is beyond the capabilities of the ambulance crew using available supplies and equipment. What does that mean? If you can't treat it in the truck, use the lights and siren. Grandma fall down, simply got no real major injuries, we can deal with that in the truck. Grandma got 5 bullet holes, can't deal with that in the truck. These trucks are massive. We got some blind spots, very hard to see vehicles and pedestrians. Look at that statement right there. Never get out of the ambulance to confront a driver. I wish I couldn't say this following statement, but I've worked with a partner who did that. And it was not pleasant. Road rage.
What?
Yeah, I worked with a partner who decided to jump out of a truck and yell at somebody.
No,
Don't do it.
that's crazy.
Excessive speed, we still need to maintain the speed limit. All right, if the limit is 55 or 65, whatever it is on 128, 93, we basically still need to do that. The lights, the siren does not give us the right to put the needle to 100. Number one, it's not safe. And number two, I don't think our trucks can even do that. Creates very dangerous situation and it limits our reaction time. Nobody around us can drive once we turn those lights and siren on. Remember that. Also, the faster we go, the more distance we need to stop. We're driving a big box that's top heavy. Very hard to stop these things. There is a name for it. It's called siren syndrome. Causes people to drive faster and increase their anxiety. Yeah, that's what's going on right there. Another defensive thing, when we're backing up our trucks, you need a spotter behind you to keep an eye on things behind you because you can't see immediately behind you. Yes, there's a rear view mirror in every single truck. Guess what it's looking at? The patient compartment, not behind you. And only a handful of trucks have a rear view camera. Cornering. Obviously, these things don't take right turns very good. They take them very wide. And left turns, you also gotta think about the fact that when you take a left, you're probably gonna cross into the opposite lane. More on that to come when you go through driver training. Weather and road conditions. We already have a longer braking time. What do you think happens in the middle of winter when we got snow on the ground?
Harder to slow down.
Very hard to slow down. Sometimes we go sledding on the ambulances. We go hydroplaning on them. Very good. These things are already top heavy, so add a little bit of speed, a little bit of snow, and someone who's being unsafe, guess what gets rolled over? The ambulance. Not good. Most of our trucks, It says here, turn on the headlights during the day, and most of our trucks do that automatically. All right, questions on defensive driving? Good. You are allowed to park or stand in an illegal location. We can use the fire lanes where we ordinarily can't use them in normal cars because we are on medical calls. We can enter streets that say, areas that say do not enter, as long as, there's fire and police there telling us to come down that way. Maybe it's a one-way road. They've already cleared it for us. We can absolutely do that. We are allowed to proceed through red lights and stop signs only once we have cleared the intersection. We are allowed to drive against the flow of traffic. It is not recommended, but you can go into the opposite lane if you got to get around a line of traffic. You are allowed to drive in the center of the lane to make it illegal for people to pass you. Driving faster than the speed limit, yes, it is allowed. Don't make it excessively above the speed limit. What are we not allowed to do, though? We cannot pass a school bus that is stopped with its lights on and its stop sign out. You have to sit there and wait for the bus driver to shut those off and close the stop sign. You are also not allowed to use the lights and siren unless you are on a true emergency, right? Just because you're getting out late does not mean you can drop a patient off at Haverhill and fly down 93 with the lights and siren because you want to go make shift in 10 minutes. That's very illegal.
Has it been done?
Yes. Very illegal. So don't do it. Right of way. Yes, in this state, we have the right of way. Vehicles are required to pull over when we are there using lights and siren. That does not mean they're going to do it. Never put anybody or any property in endangerment under any circumstances. Sometimes fire or police will escort you to the hospital. If you ask them, they're more than happy to do it. Intersections are the most common cause of crashes and the most serious. Everybody is guilty. The light's turning yellow, you speed up. The light just turned red, you're not going to stop, you fly through it. Everybody's guilty of doing this. Doesn't stop just because the lights and siren are running. How do we cross an intersection? If you can't wait for the traffic lights to change, come to a stop, look both ways, inch yourself forward, look both ways, and continue doing that until you have crossed the intersection. Don't just barrel through it. Highways, well, I keep them on until I hit the far left lane. Do that as you see fit. Unpaved roads, very slow speed, top heavy truck, unpaved uneven road, not a good sign. School zones, no matter what, you can't exceed the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. No matter what. Questions, comments, concerns? Distractions. Focus on the road. Do not focus on the phone, eating or drinking, the radio. Focus on talking to dispatch when you need to talk to dispatch, or talk to the fire department on the radio when you need to talk to the fire department. Keep your messages very brief. When you're alone, it is your responsibility to figure out the safest route and how to get there. You will be alone driving the truck when your partner's in the back with the patient. You don't have your partner to clear the intersection for you, so you got to do it a little differently. More attention. Fatigue. There's a problem when we get fatigued. When you're tired and you can't do it, you need to call the supervisor. Here at Cataldo, we do have a fatigue policy. You get 2 hours off. Now, you cannot use that at the end of your shift to get out on time. You cannot leave the base until you have been there for 2 hours and talk to the supervisor again. You will be placed out of service, for 2 hours. The argument is if you're too fatigued to drive the truck, you're too fatigued to drive home. So don't think you can call the fatigue policy and just leave and go home. Air ambulances. The only thing we're really going to be interacting with are rotary units, which are the helicopters, or going to Logan to pick up somebody who got flown in. Specially trained crews accompany air ambulances. Medevac, that's the helicopter. There are certain things we got to do. Why do we call for this? Because patients have a time-dependent illness that ground transport is going to take too long. Patient requires advanced care that even a paramedic can't do, or we got to get them to a hospital that the local hospital cannot treat. i.e., we're on 93, the local hospital is nowhere to be found, and the person got ejected from the vehicle. We need MedFlight to take them down to Boston. There you go. Patients with time-dependent injuries or illnesses. Strokes, heart attacks, spinal cord injuries, those are transfers. Those are not something that we're really going to be doing. We're calling for trauma patients, or we're being called because we got to take the MedFlight crew from their landing zone to the hospital to get the patient and right back to their helicopter. That's why we call Medevac. We're not the ones calling them. We let dispatch know we need MedFlight. They call MedFlight. We don't talk to them directly because they don't actually have our radio, nor do we have theirs. Landing zone, hard or grassy surface. You need 100 by 100 foot. Needs to be clear everywhere. Can't be anything above. Do not use caution tape or anything to mark the site or flares. Those things are just going to get kicked up and flown around by the helicopter wings. Everybody needs to be away from the zone, people and vehicles. We don't communicate the strong wind. The flight crew has already figured that out. The pilot already knows. Keep a safe distance from the aircraft. Stay away from the tail rotor. In fact, don't approach the helicopter until you're told to do so by the crew themselves. They will come to you and they will tell you how this is going to go down. Why is that? Because the main rotor blades can be as low as 4 feet off the ground, and most people are above 4 feet. So you need to crouch, you need to move very low, and just wait for them to tell you. More often than not, you'll switch the patient to their stretcher far away from the helicopter, and they will take the patient back to the helicopter themselves. We're going to do some hand signals in just next slide. Should be familiar with them. Wear eye protection, all that stuff. Everything should be secured down. Those things are probably not being shut off and they're kicking up wind everywhere. Those are the hand signals. Move right, move forward, move rear, move up, move down, move to the left. When in doubt, just do what they tell you to do. Questions on the helicopter? Night landings. We don't use spotlights or flashlights because that's going to interfere with the pilot. Everything that's overhead should be illuminated anyway. They're not going to land on uneven ground. Usually the pilots who fly for MedFlight, most of them flew Blackhawks in the military, so they know what they're doing. They're going to pick the landing site that they want. Medevac's coming to a hazmat material incident. let the flight crew know. They'll go from there. Decontaminate the patient before they go in the helicopter. The landing zone at that point, just like your ambulance, uphill, upwind. Medevac issues, there used to be a joke that went around where if there was a cloud in the sky, med flight's not flying. That has since changed. Helicopters, they don't really hit the 10,000 feet. They fly about 150 miles an hour. And depending on the size of the patient, they may refuse it. MedFlight, I think, limits to either 250 or 300-pound patients, and they will not take somebody who's actively in cardiac arrest. So keep that in mind. Everything else they will take. Questions, comments, concerns about anything? See everybody at 1.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you.
Absolutely.